双语音标领航，注音阅读启蒙，叶兴阳有声读物。
Edison, His Life and Inventions, by Frank Lewis Dyer and Thomas Comerford Martin, General Counsel for the Edison Laboratory and Allied Interests, and Thomas Comerford Martin, ex-president of the American Institute of Electrical Engineers. Contents. Introduction. I, the Age of Electricity. 2. Edison's Pedigree. 3. Boyhood at Port Huron, Michigan. 4. The Young Telegraph Operator. V. Arduous Years in the Central West. 6. Work and Invention in Boston. 7. The Stock Ticker. 8. Automatic, duplex, and quadruplex telegraphy. 9. The telephone, motograph, and microphone. X. The phonograph. 11. The invention of the incandescent lamp. 12. Memories of Menlo Park. 13. A world hunt for filament material. 14. Inventing a complete system of lighting. 15. Introduction of the Edison electric light. 16. The first Edison Central Station. 17. Other early stations. The meter. 18. The electric railway. 19. Magnetic or milling work. XX. Edison. Portland cement. 21. Motion pictures. 22. The development of the Edison storage battery. 23. Miscellaneous inventions. 24. Edison's method in inventing. 25. The laboratory at Orange and the staff. 26. Edison in commerce and manufacture. 27. The value of Edison's inventions to the world. 28. The black flag. 29. The social side of Edison. Appendix. List of United States patents. Foreign patents. Index. Introduction. Prior to this, no complete, authentic, and authorized record of the work of Mr. Edison during an active life has been given to the world. That life, if there is anything in heredity, is very far from finished, and while it continues there will be new achievement. An insistently expressed desire on the part of the public for a definitive biography of Edison was the reason for the following pages. The present authors deem themselves happy in the confidence reposed in them, and in the constant assistance they have enjoyed from Mr. Edison while preparing these pages, a great many of which are altogether his own. This cooperation in no sense relieves the authors of responsibility as to any of the views or statements of their own that the book contains. They have realized the extreme reluctance of Mr. Edison to be made the subject of any biography at all, while he has felt that, if it must be written, it were best done by the hands of friends and associates of long standing, whose judgment and discretion he could trust, and whose intimate knowledge of the facts would save him from misrepresentation. The authors of the book are profoundly conscious of the fact that the extraordinary period of electrical development embraced in it has been prolific of great men. They have named some of them, but there has been no idea of setting forth various achievements or of ascribing distinctive merits. This treatment is devoted to one man whom his fellow citizens have chosen to regard as in many ways representative of the American at his finest flowering in the field of invention during the 19th century. It is designed in these pages to bring the reader face to face with Edison, to glance at an interesting childhood and a youthful period marked by a capacity for doing things, and by an insatiable thirst for knowledge, then to accompany him into the great creative stretch of 40 years, during which he has done so much. This book shows him plunged deeply into work for which he has always had an incredible capacity, reveals the exercise of his unsurpassed inventive ability, his keen reasoning powers, his tenacious memory, his fertility of resource, follows him through a series of innumerable experiments, conducted methodically, reaching out like rays of searchlight into all the regions of science and nature, and finally exhibits him emerging triumphantly from countless difficulties, bearing with him in new arts the fruits of victorious struggle. These volumes aim to be a biography, rather than a history of electricity. but they have had to cover so much general ground in defining the relations and contributions of Edison to the electrical arts that they serve to present a picture of the whole development effected in the last 50 years, the most fruitful that electricity has known. The effort has been made to avoid technique and abstruse phrases, but some degree of explanation has been absolutely necessary in regard to each group of inventions. The task of the authors has consisted largely in summarizing fairly the methods and processes employed by Edison, and some idea of the difficulties encountered by them in so doing may be realized from the fact that one brief chapter, for example, that on or milling, covers 9 years of most intense application and activity on the part of the inventor. It is something like exhibiting the geological eras of the Earth in an outline lantern slide. To reduce an elaborate series of strenuous experiments and a vast variety of ingenious apparatus to the space of a few hundred words. A great deal of this narrative is given in Mr. Edison's own language, from oral or written statements made in reply to questions addressed to him with the object of securing accuracy. A further large part is based upon the personal contributions of many loyal associates, and it is desired here to make grateful acknowledgment to such collaborators as Messrs. Samuel Insull, E. H. Johnson, F. R. Upton, R. N. Dyer, S. B. Eaton, Francis Gell, W. S. Andrews, W. J. Jenks, W. J. Hammer, F. J. Sprague, W. S. Mallory, and C. L. Clark, and others, without whose aid the issuance of this book would indeed have been impossible. In particular, it is desired to acknowledge indebtedness to Mr. W. H. Meadowcroft not only for substantial aid in the literary part of the work, but for indefatigable effort to group, classify, and summarize the boundless material embodied in Edison's notebooks and memorabilia of all kinds now kept at the Orange Laboratory. Acknowledgment must also be made of the courtesy and assistance of Mrs. Edison, and especially of the loan of many interesting and rare photographs from her private collection. Edison, His Life and Inventions. Chapter 1. The Age of Electricity. The year 1847 marked a period of great territorial acquisition by the American people, with incalculable additions to their actual and potential wealth. By the rational compromise with England in the dispute over the Oregon region, President Polk had secured during 1846 4 undisturbed settlement, 300,000 square miles of forest, fertile land, and fisheries, including the whole fair Columbia Valley. Our active policy of the Pacific dated from that hour. With swift and clinching succession came the melodramatic Mexican War, and February 1848 saw another vast territory south of Oregon and west of the Rocky Mountains added by treaty to the United States. Thus, in about 18 months there had been pieced into the national domain for quick development and exploitation a region as large as the entire Union of 13 states at the close of the War of Independence. Moreover, within its boundaries was embraced all the great American gold field, just on the eve of discovery. For Marshall had detected the shining particles in the mill race at the foot of the Sierra Nevada 9 days before Mexico signed away her rights in California and in all the vague, remote hinterland facing Cathay Ward. Equally momentous were the times in Europe, where the attempt to secure opportunities of expansion as well as larger liberty for the individual took quite different form. The old absolutist system of government was fast breaking up, and ancient thrones were tottering. The red lava of deep revolutionary fires oozed up through many glowing cracks in the political crust, and all the social strata were shaken. That the wild outbursts of insurrection midway in the 5th decade failed and died away was not surprising, for the superincumbent deposits of tradition and convention were thick. But the retrospect indicates that many reforms and political changes were accomplished, although the process involved the exile of not a few ardent spirits to America, to become leading statesmen, inventors, journalists, and financiers. In 1847, too, Russia began her tremendous march eastward into Central Asia, just as France was solidifying her first gains on the littoral of northern Africa. In England, the fierce fervor of the Chartist movement, with its violent rhetoric as to the rights of man, was sobering down and passing pervasively into numerous practical schemes for social and political amelioration, constituting in their entirety a most profound change throughout every part of the national life. Into such times Thomas Alva Edison was born, and his relations to them and to the events of the past 60 years are the subject of this narrative. Aside from the personal interest that attaches to the picturesque career, so typically American, there is a broader aspect in which the work of the Franklin of the 19th century touches the welfare and progress of the race. It is difficult at any time to determine the effect of any single invention, and the investigation becomes more difficult where inventions of the first class have been crowded upon each other in rapid and bewildering succession. But it will be admitted that in Edison one deals with the central figure of the great age that saw the invention and introduction in practical form of the telegraph, the submarine cable, the telephone, the electric light, the electric railway, the electric trolley car, the storage battery, the electric motor, the phonograph, the wireless telegraph, and that the influence of these on the world's affairs has not been excelled at any time by that of any other corresponding advances in the arts and sciences. These pages deal with Edison's share in the great work of the last half-century in abridging distance, communicating intelligence, lessening toil, improving illumination, recording forever the human voice. And on behalf of inventive genius, it may be urged that its beneficent results and gifts to mankind compare with any to be credited to statesman, warrior, or creative writer of the same period, viewed from the standpoint of inventive progress. The first half of the 19th century had passed very profitably when Edison appeared every year marked by some notable achievement in the arts and sciences, with promise of its early and abundant fruition in commerce and industry. There had been exactly 4 decades of steam navigation on American waters. Railways were growing at the rate of nearly 1,000 miles annually. Gas had become familiar as a means of illumination in large cities. Looms and tools and printing presses were everywhere being liberated from the slow toil of manpower. The first photographs had been taken. Chloroform, nitrous oxide gas, and ether had been placed at the service of the physician in saving life, and the revolver, gun cotton, and nitroglycerin added to the agencies for slaughter. New metals, chemicals, and elements had become available in large numbers. Gases had been liquefied and solidified, and the range of useful heat and cold indefinitely extended. The safety lamp had been given to the miner, the caisson to the bridge builder, the anti-friction metal to the mechanic for bearings. It was already known how to vulcanize rubber and how to galvanize iron. The application of machinery in the harvest field had begun with the embryonic reaper, while both the bicycle and the automobile were heralded in primitive prototypes. The gigantic expansion of the iron and steel industry was foreshadowed in the change from wood to coal in the smelting furnaces. The sewing machine had brought with it, like the friction match, one of the most profound influences in modifying domestic life, and making it different from that of all preceding time. Even in 1847 few of these things had lost their novelty. Most of them were in the earlier stages of development. But it is when we turn to electricity that the rich virgin condition of an illimitable new kingdom of discovery is seen. Perhaps the word utilization or application is better than discovery, for then, as now, an endless wealth of phenomena noted by experimenters from Gilbert to Franklin and Faraday awaited the invention that could alone render them useful to mankind. The 18th century, keenly curious and ceaselessly active in this fascinating field of investigation, had not, after all, left much of a legacy in either principles or appliances. The lodestone and the compass, the frictional machine, the Leyden jar, the nature of conductors and insulators, the identity of electricity and the thunderstorm flash, the use of lightning rods, the physiological effects of an electrical shock, these constituted the bulk of the bequest to which philosophers were the only heirs. Pregnant with possibilities were many of the observations that had been recorded. But these few appliances made up the meager kit of tools with which the 19th century entered upon its task of acquiring the arts and conveniences now such an intimate part of human nature's daily food, that the average American today pays more for his electrical service than he does for bread. With the first year of the new century came Volta's invention of the chemical battery as a means of producing electricity. A well-known Italian picture represents Volta exhibiting his apparatus before the young conqueror Napoleon, then ravishing from the peninsula its treasure of ancient art and founding an ephemeral empire. At such a moment, this gift of despoiled Italy to the world was a noble revenge, setting in motion incalculable beneficent forces and agencies. For the first time, man had command of a steady supply of electricity without toil or effort. The useful results obtainable previously from the current of a frictional machine were not much greater than those to be derived from the flight of a rocket. While the frictional appliance is still employed in medicine, it ranks with the flint axe and the tinderbox in industrial obsolescence. No art or trade could be founded on it. No diminution of daily work or increase of daily comfort could be secured with it. But the little battery with its metal plates in a weak solution proved a perennial reservoir of electrical energy, safe and controllable, from which supplies could be drawn at will. That which was wild had become domesticated. Regular crops took the place of haphazard gleanings from brake or prairie. The possibility of electrical starvation was forever left behind. Immediately new processes of inestimable value revealed themselves. New methods were suggested. Almost all the electrical arts now employed made their beginnings in the next 25 years. And while the more extensive of them depend today on the dynamo for electrical energy, some of the most important still remain in loyal allegiance to the older source. The battery itself soon underwent modifications, and new types were evolved: the storage, the double fluid,
and the dry.
Various analogies next pointed to the use of heat, and the thermoelectric cell emerged, embodying the application of flame to the junction of two different metals. Davy, of the safety lamp, threw a volume of current across the gap between two sticks of charcoal, and the voltaic arc, forerunner of electric lighting, shed its bright beams upon a dazzled world. The decomposition of water by electrolytic action was recognized and made the basis of communicating at a distance even before the days of the electromagnet. The ties that bind electricity and magnetism in twinship of relation and interaction were detected, and Faraday's work in induction gave the world at once the dynamo and the motor. "Hitch your wagon to a star," said Emerson. To all the coal fields and all the waterfalls Faraday had directly hitched the wheels of industry. Not only was it now possible to convert mechanical energy into electricity cheaply and in illimitable quantities, but electricity at once showed its ubiquitous availability as a motive power. Boats were propelled by it, cars were hauled, and even papers printed. Electroplating became an art, and telegraphy sprang into active being on both sides of the Atlantic. At the time Edison was born, in 1847, telegraphy, upon which he was to leave so indelible an imprint, had barely struggled into acceptance by the public. In England, Wheatstone and Cooke had introduced a ponderous magnetic needle telegraph. In America, in 1840, Morse had taken out his first patent on an electromagnetic telegraph, the principle of which is dominating in the art to this day. For years later, the memorable message, "What hath God wrought?" was sent by young Miss Ellsworth over his circuits, and incredulous Washington was advised by wire of the action of the Democratic Convention in Baltimore in nominating Polk. By 1847, circuits had been strung between Washington and New York, under private enterprise, the government having declined to buy the Morse system for $100,000. Everything was crude and primitive. The poles were 200 feet apart and could barely hold up a wash line. The slim, bare copper wire snapped on the least provocation, and the circuit was down for 36 days in the first 6 months. The little glass knob insulators made seductive targets for ignorant sportsmen. Attempts to insulate the line wire were limited to coating it with tar or smearing it with wax for the benefit of all the bees in the neighborhood. The farthest western reach of the telegraph lines in 1847 was Pittsburgh, with 3-ply iron wire mounted on square glass insulators with a little wooden pentroof for protection. In that office, where Andrew Carnegie was a messenger boy, the magnets in use to receive the signals sent with the aid of powerful nitric acid batteries weighed as much as 75 pounds apiece. But the business was fortunately small at the outset, until the new device, patronized chiefly by lotterymen, had proved its utility. Then came the great outburst of activity. Within a score of years, telegraph wires covered the whole occupied country with a network, and the first great electrical industry was a pronounced success, yielding to its pioneers the first great harvest of electrical fortunes. It had been a sharp struggle for bare existence, during which such a man as the founder of Cornell University had been glad to get breakfast in New York with $0.25 picked up on Broadway. Chapter 2. Edison's Pedigree. Thomas Alva Edison was born at Milan, Ohio, February 11, 1847. The state that rivals Virginia as a mother of presidents has evidently other titles to distinction of the same nature. For picturesque detail, it would not be easy to find any story excelling that of the Edison family before it reached the Western Reserve. The story epitomizes American idealism, restlessness, freedom of individual opinion, and ready adjustment to the surrounding conditions of pioneer life. The ancestral Edisons who came over from Holland, as nearly as can be determined, in 1730, were descendants of extensive millers on the Zuyder Zee, and took up patents of land along the Passaic River, New Jersey, close to the home that Mr. Edison established in the Orange Mountains 160 years later. They landed at Elizabethport, New Jersey, and first settled near Caldwell in that state, where some graves of the family may still be found. President Cleveland was born in that quiet hamlet. It is a curious fact that in the Edison family the pronunciation of the name has always been with a long E sound, as it would naturally be in the Dutch language. The family prospered and must have enjoyed public confidence, for we find the name of Thomas Edison as a bank official on Manhattan Island, signed to continental currency in 1778. According to the family records, this Edison, great-grandfather of Thomas Alva, reached the extreme old age of 104 years. But all was not well, and, as has happened so often before, the politics of father and son were violently different. The Loyalist movement that took to Nova Scotia so many Americans after the War of Independence carried with it John, the son of this stalwart Continental. Thus it came about that Samuel Edison, son of John, was born at Digby, Nova Scotia, in 1804. 7 years later, John Edison, who, as a Loyalist or United Empire emigrant, had become entitled under the laws of Canada to a grant of 600 acres of land, moved westward to take possession of this property. He made his way through the state of New York in wagons drawn by oxen to the remote and primitive township of Bayfield, in Upper Canada, on Lake Huron. Although the journey occurred in balmy June, it was necessarily attended with difficulty and privation, but the new home was situated in good farming country, and once again this interesting nomadic family settled down. John Edison moved from Bayfield to Vienna, Ontario, on the northern bank of Lake Erie. Mr. Edison supplies an interesting reminiscence of the old man and his environment in those early Canadian days. When I was 5 years old, I was taken by my father and mother on a visit to Vienna. We were driven by carriage from Milan, Ohio, to a railroad, then to a port on Lake Erie, thence by a canal boat in a tow of several to Port Burwell, in Canada, across the lake, and from there we drove to Vienna, a short distance away. I remember my grandfather perfectly as he appeared, at 102 years of age. When he died, in the middle of the day he sat under a large tree in front of the house facing a well-traveled road. His head was covered completely with a large quantity of very white hair, and he chewed tobacco incessantly, nodding to friends as they passed by. He used a very large cane, and walked from the chair to the house, resenting any assistance. I viewed him from a distance, and could never get very close to him. I remember some large pipes, and especially a molasses jug, a trunk, and several other things that came from Holland. John Edison was long-lived, like his father, and reached the ripe old age of 102, leaving his son Samuel charged with the care of the family destinies, but with no great burden of wealth. Little is known of the early manhood of this father of T.A. Edison until we find him keeping a hotel at Vienna, marrying a schoolteacher there, Miss Nancy Elliott, in 1828, and taking a lively share in the troublous politics of the time. He was 6 feet in height, of great bodily vigor, and of such personal dominance of character that he became a captain of the insurgent forces rallying under the banners of Papineau and Mackenzie. The opening years of Queen Victoria's reign witnessed a belated effort in Canada to emphasize the principle that there should not be taxation without representation, and this descendant of those who had left the United States from disapproval of such a doctrine flung himself headlong into its support. It has been said of Earl Durham, who pacified Canada at this time and established the present system of government, that he made a country and marred a career. But the immediate measures of repression enforced before a liberal policy was adopted were sharp and severe. And Samuel Edison also found his own career marred on Canadian soil as one result of the Durham administration. Exile to Bermuda with other insurgents was not so attractive as the perils of a flight to the United States. A very hurried departure was effected in secret from the scene of trouble, and there are romantic traditions of his thrilling journey of 182 miles toward safety, made almost entirely without food or sleep, through a wild country infested with Indians of unfriendly disposition. Thus was the Edison family repatriated by a picturesque political episode, and the great inventor given a birthplace on American soil, just as was Benjamin Franklin when his father came from England to Boston. Samuel Edison left behind him, however, in Canada, several brothers, all of whom lived to the age of 90 or more, and from whom there are descendants in the region. After some desultory wanderings for a year or two, along the shores of Lake Erie, among the prosperous towns then springing up, the family, with its Canadian home forfeited, and in quest of another resting place, came to Milan, Ohio. In 1842, that pretty little village offered at the moment many attractions as a possible Chicago. The railroad system of Ohio was still in the future, but the Western Reserve had already become a vast wheat field, and huge quantities of grain from the central and northern counties sought shipment to eastern ports. The Huron River, emptying into Lake Erie, was navigable within a few miles of the village and provided an admirable outlet. Large granaries were established and proved so successful that local capital was tempted into the project of making a towpath canal from Lockwood Landing all the way to Milan itself. The quaint old Moravian mission and quondam Indian settlement of 100 inhabitants found itself of a sudden one of the great grain ports of the world, and bidding fair to rival Russian Odessa. A number of grain warehouses, or primitive elevators,